Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here to talk about the theme to Judge Judy, also sometimes known as Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, at least if you want to hear everything past the opening few bars. Well, here we are, the most popular, best-known piece of classical music in existence. It's been recorded hundreds of times, and I have reduced the worthy few to 10 recordings, just a double handful. That is all I'm going to be talking about. Now, of course, we all know what the worst are. You know, Pletnev, Theodore Karensis, all of those kooky people who feel like painting mustaches on the Mona Lisa. And of course, the Dadaist interpretation of Beethoven's Fifth can be amusing, and it can be fun. But I have chosen 10 recordings that I think give you the range of what can be done with the music while still respecting what it is. And it's a very wide range, believe you me. There's an extraordinary variety of recordings that I've chosen, and I think some of them may surprise you. So we're going to have a really, really good time with this. But first, I want to talk about the piece a little bit, just a little bit, the kind of things I listen for, and maybe point out some things that you may not have noticed. And that's particularly true of the first movement. Now, as we all know, the first movement is supposed to represent fate knocking at the door or something like that. Who knows? But it supposedly does give this sort of sense of a victorious, implacable destiny. Why? Because that four-note rhythm is just so bloody obsessive. You keep hearing it everywhere. It's under, it's on top, it's in the middle, it's in front, it's in the back, it's everywhere you go. It's ba-ba-ba-bum, da-da-da-dum, ba-ba-ba-bum. And of course, that rhythm permeates the whole symphony and becomes the engine driving the finale forward at one point. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. And I really, really want to talk about the fascinating aspects of the first movement. How does Beethoven achieve the victory of this inimical form? The inimical, is that the word? Inimical? Naughty, let's say that. Evil, whatever it is, force. How does he do it? He does it in the most wonderful possible way. In short, he does it by transforming all of the other themes in the movement. What's really fascinating about this first movement is that it only has 3 thematic elements that are really worth noting, that are distinctive. And the first one, which is the da-da-da-da business, that never changes. That starts out hostile. Goodness, what is wrong with me? That starts out hostile, thank you, and it stays hostile. And that's the point, because it's the one unchangeable, unyielding element in the entire movement. And what I want you to notice, I'm going to play you the first theme before we get to the transition to the second subject. What I want you to notice how this first subject, although it's based on that little 4-note thingy, that little thingy, it's constantly expanding. It builds up. It gets bigger. It's always trying to burst the bounds of its whatever they are, its restraints. It's got all the energy in the movement, and that is a very, very important thing. Now, the performance I'm going to play is one of my recommended ones, a fabulous performance. Paul Kletsky and the Czech Philharmonic. We have been listening to many of these throughout these Beethoven talks because A, I have permission from Supraphon to do it, and B, they are fantastic. And nowhere more so than in this performance of the Fifth. The Czech Philharmonic sounds like no other orchestra, and Kletsky really lets it rip, especially here. So let's listen to the opening of the symphony, just the first subject. And what I want you to pay attention to is to the way that it keeps growing Every phrase, every paragraph is longer than the one that came before, until the only way Beethoven can stop the momentum, essentially, is by running it into a brick wall. It just hits this big dissonance, this and that makes it stop. It's just an amazing thing. And so there's all of this kinetic energy that's building up and building up. And it could do it indefinitely. It really could. Here it is. Listen to the opening now and listen to that constant expansion of power that the first subject contains. I hope you heard what I was talking about there. It's a remarkable thing because you wouldn't think, since it's based on repetition, right? Repetition of this tiny little motive, that it could become so cohesive and large. But it is. It's a big, long musical paragraph. Very big and very long. Now, the next idea is simply the transitional horn/bassoon motive between the first subject and the second subject. Ta 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 ba bum. You know that. And here it is. I mean, I'll play it for you. What the heck, you know. Okay, so you know that one. Now that particular thing has very, very little character of its own, other than a certain nobility, because it's a fanfare. I mean, it's a tiny little fanfare, but it does have a certain nobility. It does contrast with the first subject, even though it contains the same four-note motive, by the way. It has the potential to transform that four-note motive into something more heroic, more positive, perhaps, less angry. All of those things are latent. All of that potential is there, and we hear it right away. And then we get the second subject. Now, what's fascinating about the second subject is that it's lyrical. It's supposedly, because it's lyrical, you think of it in terms of long-breathed, sustained melodies. But this second subject is not like that. It is interestingly phrased and surprisingly short. It consists of 3 8-note phrases. Do 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 do. Then that gets repeated. Then it gets repeated one more time. And then it starts to get broken up. It does just the opposite of what happens to the first subject, which expands and builds. This one gets chopped down. Do 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 boo do 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 da 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 ba da da da. You hear it first in 8 notes, and then in 4 notes, and then it makes a crescendo leading to the end of the exposition, right? And there you could even hear it in 2 notes if you want. Beethoven is undermining its lyricism and compressing it. So it's just the opposite, even though its emotional character, the emotional character would lend you to believe that it's trying to be even broader than that opening subject, but it doesn't succeed in doing it, at least at this point. And let's listen to that bit right now. Listen to how Beethoven chops up the phrases as it proceeds. It's very subtle and very, very sophisticated writing. Here you go. So there you go. Those are the three characters, essentially, in this particular movement, the three musical characters anyway. We'll have to talk about character in another way, anon, in a moment. And so that's what we're dealing with. Now, how does Beethoven manage to make sure that that opening first subject, the thing with all the energy, the thing that keeps building, actually wins this particular battle? Well, the first thing he needs to do is defang that horn thing, the da-da-da-do-do-do, the thing that threatened to turn that four-note subject into something far less menacing. He has to pull its teeth out, and he does. He does it in the development section. Now, the development section contains two separate sections. One is a development of the opening four-note motive, which rises to a furious, furious climax, a rage, anger, hysteria, violence. It gets really angry. And when it really gets angry, in comes the transition theme. And Beethoven proceeds to have that transition theme completely neutered. How does he neuter it? By chopping it up into shorter and shorter bits until it simply becomes a one-note pulsation. All of the energy is sucked out of it, as well as all of the nobility, all of the heroism. It's all gone. It just becomes a timeless, rhythmless pulsation. It's an amazing passage, which you may very well know. It's been often discussed. It's brilliant. And, Leonard Bernstein talked about it in like the Young People's Concerts or his talk about Beethoven's Fifth. It's one of the most famous passages in the symphony. And so here it is. Listen to how Beethoven tames this particular beastie, this heroic beastie. And thus, having been tamed, we can move on to the recapitulation. But here's the part that most people don't notice, and that I just think is fascinating. And I don't really even see it discussed very frequently, not at least in popular literature. What happened to that second subject? The beautiful lyrical second subject? Well, of course, because we get to the recapitulation, we hear all of the material presented as it was in the recapitulation, in the exposition, at least initially, except all in, more or less the same key, in C major instead of E flat major. Rather, there's some things that happen tonally that we don't need to get into, but we hear the same themes in the same order that we heard at the beginning of the symphony. And you would think that about does it. Then the rest is coda. But what is that coda? What most people, I think, don't realize, and really ought to because it's just the coolest thing in the symphony, in my opinion, is that the coda functions as a second development section. This was a habit that Beethoven got from Haydn, specifically Haydn's 12 London symphonies, where he wrote big extra developmental codas to all of his first movements. But what this coda accomplishes is the transformation of that beautiful lyrical second subject into a volcano of hysterical anger. In other words, he moves it over to the dark side. And this transformation is so spectacular and so stunning that I wager that most people don't even notice it's happening. They really don't. But the fascinating thing about it is that it's extremely literal. Once you know what it is, I point it out to people, they go, oh, yeah, that's what that is. So I'm going to play you the whole big passage in question. It begins, once again, with the defanged, heroic little horn transition, but it proceeds this time straight into the second subject. You may not notice it, but I'm going to play you the whole passage and see if you can figure it out. Then we'll do a little A-B comparison to make it a little bit easier. Here's the passage in question. you'll notice that Kletsky really gives a little bit of extra rhetorical emphasis to the return of the four-note motto theme at the beginning, doesn't he? Oh, it's wonderful. At the end of that passage, it's amazing. But let me play you now. I'm going to play you now a section of it and the corresponding section in the second subject as it originally appeared. Remember when I said it started with a theme of 8 notes? Do, 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 right? And then it gets broken up into 4-note phrases. Do, 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 do. Well, that is what you are going to hear. Initially, as Beethoven develops it and turns it into this horrible, fanged, clawed creature of nightmares, and then I will put in a second pause, and you'll hear it as it originally appeared. And I think that will make the correspondence extremely clear, and your jaw should just hit the ground at Beethoven's unbelievable genius in transforming his themes and turning them into Jekyll and Hyde type characters while really maintaining their exact identity. It's just oh God, it gives me a thrill just to talk about it. I get a chill. So here is that passage with the original. Unbelievably cool, isn't it? And really, actually, that whole violent coda, it consists mostly of the second subject. It's repeated in an amazingly literal way. And the more you listen to it, the more you sort of compare them both and can do it in real time in your head, the more you'll hear that. But that's what I think makes this first movement so incredible, because Beethoven achieves his victory of fate or victory of destiny or victory of evil forces or whatever you want to call them by actually transforming the other themes so as to either subjugate them completely, as in the little horn fanfare thing, or turn them into a totally opposite, completely different character, but one that shares the same characteristics as that mean, nasty opening fate theme. And so the entire movement has been given over to fate. If we call, I hate to call it fate because what does that mean? But you know what I mean. It's been given over to the emotional and expressive qualities of the first subject, that threatening, angry, energetic, hostile. There's nothing left but that. And Beethoven does it through the development of the material and the transformation of those themes. And that is just beyond fabulous. So, that is one of the things when I listen to this symphony, I want to get a sense that the conductor knows this, that he's not just playing it to be loud and noisy and fast. And by the way, I have to say, it's best not to take this music too quickly. You want to actually hear what's going on. You want to hear things like phrase rhythm. If you just blow through it, lickety-split, it's very difficult to hear what's actually happening in terms of the development that Beethoven intends. So keep that in mind too. So after that we have, the beautiful second movement with its heroic fanfare as well that anticipates the fanfare of the finale, and of course the fabulous, creepy, spooky Scherzo. Now there is an issue with that Scherzo because originally the third movement, Beethoven intended it to come around twice. That is Scherzo Trio, Scherzo Trio, Scherzo. And later he pulled out the repeat. And there's a certain amount of controversy as to whether it should only go around once. I personally believe it should only go around once. And the reason for that is because it's going to come back in the middle of the finale. And that is effectively the extra repeat of the Scherzo. And I think having it go around too many times gives that movement too much individual independence of form. It becomes an independent unit, whereas, as you know, it runs without a break into the finale. And Beethoven gradually, I think, came to conceive of the Scherzo and finale as a single thing, as one entity. And to make that entity more unified, it's best not to have the opening bit be all that detachable. It becomes more detachable the more you repeat its various elements. So taking out one repeat and leaving it for later when it reappears in the middle of the finale, binds the whole thing together more effectively. You won't hear any performances that I'm listing here that take that repeat, but there was a movement to do it a while back. I mean, Kurt Mazur did it, a few other people did it. I think it's a mistake, I really do. The other thing that really gets me is in the finale, which may have a repeat or may not. I don't think it matters. I really don't. I think actually it's probably better without the repeat, to be honest with you. But, if it's a really great performance, I don't mind hearing the exposition all over again, even in the finale, but it makes it a very long finale. It's that, Beethoven often puts fascinating music into his bass lines. One of the things you may have noticed is that in the first movement, in the lyrical second subject, do 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 do, underneath it, it's do 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 cha 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 cha. It's down there in the basses. You've got to hear Beethoven's bass lines. Important things happen, and in this particular movement, underneath that horn theme, da 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 da, that thing. There is a wonderful mobile bass line, like that. You never hear it. You almost never ever hear it because the timpani or fortissimo. Beethoven, and it wasn't because he was deaf. He misjudged things quite often in his orchestration. I mean, his orchestration is fabulous too, but it can be very tricky to balance. And this is one of those passages. And I always want to hear those bass lines in Beethoven because there's thematic substance down there, and you gotta hear what they're doing. Now, the first time that bass line comes out, it's pretty easy to bring it out. The second time it's virtually impossible. Something's happening down there, but you can't really hear it because of the way it's pitched and the way the parts are distributed. But you get the picture, and I'm going to play you because it happens to be absolutely fabulous in this performance by Kletsky and the Czech Phil. You really hear that bass line at that passage. So I want to just play you that passage so you get a sense of what I'm talking about. Listen down below. Listen underneath the horns. After the horns do their tunes, do 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 do, chung chung chung. Usually that's all you hear is the chung chung chung. It's just this sort of blasty noise thing with everybody snorting and huffing and puffing along. But there's a tune, a melody down there, and here it is. Yeah, how many times you heard that? There's some people who bring it out. They really do. Sometimes you have to make a big diminuendo to bring it out, which is also bad because you don't want to lessen the energy. You want to increase the energy. It should be, even the guys on the bottom are getting to do something. That's how excited we are. So it's tricky. It's tricky. So I start in my list of fabulous recordings with Paul Kletsky and the Czech Philharmonic. Now, these are not in any order of preference until we get to my however version. At the end, these are all great Beethoven's Fifth. And as I'm sure you heard from this, there are many individual moments in this performance, from that wonderful rhetorical bum, 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 just before the end, to the fantastic woodwind section of the Czech Philharmonic, as usual, to the wonderful transparency between all the orchestral sections. It's just fantastic. And tempi that are not too quick, which is important, especially in the first movement. So, Kletsky and the Czech Phil on Supraphon. That's number one. Number two, well, you knew it was coming, didn't you? It had to be mentioned. And here it is. Kleiber! Erich Kleiber, not Carlos. In fact, Carlos is not here at all. And I'll tell you why. And I'll tell you why I prefer Erich. First of all, because it's with the Concertgebouw from, the 1950s. It just was a wonderful, wonderful orchestra. And Erich Kleiber, I think, was just like his son, only with more character, just more fire, more passion. Now, the Carlos Kleiber Beethoven Fifth, the one everybody recommends, is a fantastic performance of Beethoven's Fifth. I don't deny anybody that. It is an excellent, excellent version. However, I really, really find it faceless. It's very well played. It's extremely tight. It's disciplined. It's fiery. It's rhythmic. It has all those things going for it. But I find it lacking in character. It just doesn't excite me. I respect it, but it just, I don't know. That's me. And when you listen to it and compare it to Daddy Erich, you hear exactly what's missing. You hear just that element of human warmth and fire and just, I don't know, even more conviction. I think the orchestra sounds like it's working harder. And Beethoven has to sound like they're working very, very hard. So this is on Decca. It's Erich Kleiber with the Concertgebouw. And I really, really, really like it. This is a wonderful set, by the way. Of course, it's got all of his Decca recordings. And you get a couple of Eroicas. And what's not to love, really? So that's that one. Also excellent is Macaris in the period instrument style kind of performance. Now, this, of course, is with the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic. It is period instrument influenced, but these are not period instruments. And I think that that's a good thing. I don't think there is a successful period instrument version of the Fifth that compares favorably, if in an A-B comparison with modern instruments. I just think they sound too small. And I think that the ensembles are too small. And especially when you get to the finale, when all the brass comes cranking in. I mean, yeah, they can drown everybody out, but it just doesn't sound right to me. The grandeur isn't there, and it's not just grandeur, but it's grandeur combined with a certain level of warmth and majesty and emotional satisfaction that I don't get from the period instrument folks, but I do from Charles Macaris. He's wonderful. And one of the things that he noticed, by the way, which I always find fascinating, is that Beethoven, you may know, in the finale calls for some extra instruments, 3 trombones, a piccolo, and a contrabassoon. Now, the piccolo part is completely independent. It doesn't play until the finale. But the contrabassoon only plays basically with the basses. It doesn't do anything soloistically. And there are performances where you hear the contrabassoon farting away ridiculously all the way through the finale. Like Corensis, for example. It's so stupid and ridiculous. You're not supposed to know it's there all of a sudden. Macaris reasons, and I think indicatively of his musicality and common sense, that Beethoven writes the separate part of the finale to make sure it's there, but he found it unlikely that a contrabassoon, which was used all the time back in those days to double the bass line, did not play earlier in the symphony. And so Macaris has the double bass play along with the bass line for the rest of the symphony at strategic points. And sometimes you hear it a little bit, sometimes you don't. But the point is, it makes sense. And it's so typical of Macaris's approach to performances using authentic instruments. It's authentic instruments or period instruments mixed with good musical sense. And so that's why I love Charles Macaris and the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra. Now, here's a performance that may give a little zotz to you may not expect. Schulte with the Vienna Philharmonic. Remember these early Schulte recordings? We so badly need an early Schulte box, really, with all of his London recordings and all of his Vienna recordings. They should just stick them in a box, Decca, and issue them. These performances of Beethoven's 3, 5, and 7 are really, really good. And this Fifth is hot. It is hot. It is hotter than Carlos Kleiber. And nobody will believe me until maybe you'll listen to it. And then you'll hear just how much more exciting and passionate and intense It really is. It's a wonderful, wonderful performance from a conductor who, he had his fans, he had his admirers, he recorded way too much. His Beethoven was generally pretty good, but this fifth is the best of it. It's a tremendous performance. So, Schulte. Also superb in Beethoven's fifth, Günter Wand. Now, one of the things I really like about Günter Wand, this is with NDR, is the way, you talk about some of these things. Okay, let me just throw it out there. Balance and texture. You want to hear the trombones in the finale, but not in a vulgar and ridiculous way? Here's your guy, because he allows the trombones and the trumpets and everything balances without any sense of inhibition. There's no fussiness about this performance at all, but it's very, very, very beautifully put together. The ensemble sonority in this performance is just gorgeous. The tempi are perfect. It just flows. It flows really effortlessly, but you can really hear down through the texture in a way that I think is very, very gratifying. So Günter Wand's NDR on RCA is a wonderful performance. And, oh yes, a classic, a double classic. Klemperer! Now, Klemperer's Beethoven Fifth, the stereo one, was notable, first of all, because it takes all the repeats, including the one in the finale, but also it's quite slow. It's really slow. I don't mind that a bit. Again, I always say the tempo isn't as important as the phrasing and the treatment of texture and balance. Klemperer was a huge woodwind guy. He liked forward woodwind balances. And this performance, the stereo one, you hear everything. And it's really cool. I mean, that horn theme that I played you, the example, do, 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 in the finale, that's actually horns and oboes doubling. Well, here you hear the oboes. They're as loud as the horns. It's very, very cool. Or in the first movement, in the development section, there's a section, I actually played it for you, and it comes out quite well in the Kletsky performance too, where the orchestra is going da 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 bum bum do 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 chugga chung chugga chung, and behind that the woodwinds are going do 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 like that. Most of the time you didn't hear it. This is like solo city. In fact, this performance is so extraordinary in some passages when it comes to balance that when I first heard it, I went rushing to hear, other performances, to hear the same things I was hearing here, and I couldn't hear them. This was the thing that got me into criticism, because I said, what did Beethoven write? Why don't we hear this? What's going on? Of course, the other thing I was listening to was Karajan, who hated woodwinds. Covered them at every opportunity with the strings. So he was the worst person in the world to compare to Klemperer if you want to hear the inner parts that Beethoven put into the music. But this is wonderful. The finale is just grand and dark and tragic, but unsentimental, as always with Klemperer. That's what allows him to get away with it, because he's not being soggy and he's not being pompous. He's just being what's the word? Just dispassionately, effectively granitic. Everyone talks about Klemperer being granitic, like granite, carved from stone. Wonderful. But he also did a mono Beethoven Fifth without all the repeats a few years before the stereo one that's quicker. So if you love Klemperer's approach, but you just think the stereo remake is too slow, you can hear it a little bit more quickly in excellent mono. So, you're okay no matter what happens. You really are. So after that, and if Klemperer isn't slow enough for you, there's always Frickschei. Frickschei is, this is really one of his last recordings, or it's up there among them. It's with the Berlin Philharmonic. It's quite marvelous. But my God, that second movement, it's almost 14 minutes. Macaris is 15 seconds less than 9 minutes. And in a movement that's that long, I mean, you're talking double speeds almost, it's 50% longer or shorter or whatever. It's really a huge difference. But Frickschei's Beethoven was fantastic, absolutely fantastic. And actually, it's Frickschei. I'm saying Frickschei. I'm sorry, Hungarians. Frickschei, here he is. Anyway, aside from that really slow second movement, it's a performance like everything Fritzsche did, of just tremendous humanity and intensity and depth. And oh God, it's wonderful. And it's similar to Klemperer, but in some ways it's so different. Klemperer was not a sentimentalist. Klemperer would not stretch out the tempo of the slow movement the way Fritzsche does, but he makes it work, and it's an extraordinary personal statement. And again, part of my point in choosing these performances is to give you a sense of all of the different things that you can do with this symphony, but still have it sound like Beethoven's Fifth, but still not have it be some sort of, deranged prostitution of what Beethoven intended. So Fritzsche is also wonderful and worth considering. Another great one, Antal Dorati. This is my performance of choice for bass lines. Wow, do you hear bass lines? Bass lines everywhere. Dorati was very, very good Beethoven conductor. Swift tempos, passionate, wonderful, thrilling stuff in his Mercury Living Presence Beethoven recordings. Some of them are just amazing. And this Fifth is fantastic. Absolutely fantastic for all of those reasons, for its textural clarity, for its leanness, for its vibrancy, all of those things. It just leaps out of the speakers. It's wonderful. So Dorati is another one to consider, but we're down to the last two. What do you think they're going to be? Oh, the excitement. It's building. It's building. Hey, now we'll save that for last. Markievicz. Now, you have to have French Beethoven. And you particularly have to have French Beethoven in the Fifth, because the finale is the most revolutionary, in the Napoleonic sense, rabble-rousing music that Beethoven ever wrote. It really, really is. And there's something about those French trumpets, the piercing trumpets and trombones, those brassy brass, that's what they are. Those really bright brass playing that fits this music to a T. And Markievicz, of course, is just such a great conductor in just about everything he did. Now, I would have chosen for French, because I often do, the Carl Schuricht Paris Conservatoire performances. But this is Markievicz with the L'Amoureux Orchestra, which had all of the same tonal qualities, essentially, as the Paris Conservatoire Orchestra, only it's in fantastic stereo, and you really have to hear this, particularly for the finale. It just raises the roof. And, it's a completely unashamed, popular festival, a celebration of the plebeian, of the workers. It's left-wing music. Oh, it's just great. So Markiewicz's Beethoven Fifth is definitely one to hear. However, yes, we can only have only one, and the one that is my fave, my absolute fave. Well, it's not my absolute fave, but it's one of the great, great, great ones, is this one on Orfeo. George Szell live with the Vienna Philharmonic. So you see, you're not going to miss Kleiber, because you get Vienna with Schulte and you get Vienna with Szell. And Szell did this 3 times, and in fabulous stereo, all of them. You've got the Cleveland one, which is fantastic. You get the Concertgebouw one that was on Philips, now Decca, which is fantastic, coupled with Sibelius' Second Symphony at one point. Really a cool deal. And then there's this. This is a single concert that he gave, when was it? I don't even know. It's 1969. And it's recorded in absolutely first-rate stereo before a deathly quiet audience. I mean, the concerts, they were done at like 11 a.m. in the morning or something, some ridiculous time. But not only do you get a fantastic Beethoven Fifth, but you get the Third Piano Concerto in Emile Gilel's best performance ever of that. And the concert opens with a tremendous Egmont Overture. What a great Beethoven concert. But this performance of the Fifth is just as good as it gets, folks. And if you want to hear Vienna at their top with that extra that extra frisson is the word. I've never known what a frisson is, but there's an extra one here. That extra oomph, that extra jolt of energy that comes from it being live, and a conductor like Zell, who was just a maniac. I mean, again, Carlos Kleiber, yeah, okay, he's very good. But when you can have Zell live with the Vienna Philharmonic and fantastic stereo, who the hell needs Carlos Kleiber? Come on, people. Use your ears and listen to this Beethoven Fifth. It's an extraordinary performance and one that I will always, always love. And so those are my top 10 Beethoven Fives. I hope you noticed there were a few surprises, but also a few well-loved favorites. But the whole point here, as I said, is that together they show that there is an enormous range of possibilities and ways of characterizing this symphony without being stupid. Remember the other t-shirt I have? It's not this one, the one that says, abnormal is fine, stupid is not. And that is definitely the case with Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. Go ahead, personalize it, play with it, but don't be disgusting. I don't want to deal with that. Anyway, thank you for joining me for this rather lengthy talk. I hope it has given you an opportunity to go back to the symphony and listen to it for the 30 billionth time. And keep on listening, folks. Take care. Bye-bye.